I wouldn't know how to operate that if you gave me the time to. But with that, I'd like to introduce any of our candidates who would like to come forward and give roughly 2 minutes to talk about themselves, and, introduce themselves if they haven't been around. And everybody, is it rolling? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You ready?
Yeah.
Well, guys, I think I know most everybody here, but if I don't know you, I'm Brad Cox. I'm running for House District 16. I announced that a couple months ago here at one of our meetings. Currently serve on the Fayette County Commission and very proud of the work that this commission has done the nearly 2 years that I've been on, and the probably preceding 2 or 3 years before that. You may not agree with some of my decisions or the things that we've done, but at the end of the day, I've never had to lay my head down on my bed and regret anything I've done. I think I've represented the district professionally, with integrity, with honesty. I think being on the county commission, being a former educator, and now being in finance and banking, I think that offers a really unique trifecta there to go down to Montgomery and work for this district. People, a lot of people ask me as I've been out in the communities. I've been all over. I've been in Jefferson. I've been in Tuscaloosa. I've been talking to different groups and individuals. And I say, is the county, is the county commission not enough headache for you already? Why do you want to do this? What's your motive behind running? And I tell them, I graduated college on May 19th. I got hired here May 30th, and the only person I knew was the principal that hired me. And I moved here, and folks, a lot of you in this room took me in and raised me just nearly. I just turned 22 years old. And, I told my wife when we got married, I said, I want to be buried right here in Fayette County. This is home to me now. I inherited land, inherited property back where I grew up, and I sold it because this is home. I live, I work, and I worship here. And I can't make any big promises to you tonight about legislation that I'm going to pass or committees that I'm going to serve on, but I'll represent you with honesty and integrity. I'll represent you professionally, and I will do the right thing. I'll have an open door, and I'll have a phone that I'll answer, just like I do now on the county commission, much to the horror of my wife. At 8, 9 o'clock at night, people are calling that, there's a tree in the road, or why are y'all doing this? But it's important to me to be visible and to be transparent. I want to take my experiences. I want to go to work for you in Montgomery. And I will be around after the meeting. I know this isn't the proper time. And if you've got questions about where I'm at on issues, I don't mind to tell you. If I don't know about a particular issue, I'll learn about it, and I'll call you, text you, and email you. Tomorrow I'll be going live with all my campaign stuff, social media, press release, and all that. So be looking tomorrow evening for that. But I would appreciate your support. I would appreciate your vote, and I'll answer any questions you have after the meeting. I'll be around. So thank you, and it's been a pleasure to get to talk to you tonight.
Any other candidates for any other positions?
How y'all doing tonight? I'm Floyd Rodgers, Jr. I'm a man of probably few words, but a lot of action. I believe in allowing my actions to speak louder than my words. I'm a minister here in Fayette County. I'm an ACE coordinator. A lot of people don't know what ACE means. ACE stands for Alabama Community of Excellence. So I pretty much work hand in hand with the mayor, city council. I'm like the bridge that pulls in the citizens of Fayette and the civil leaders of Fayette. And so what the ACE coordinator does is pretty much try to help Fayette to grow, help Fayette to move forward. And I mentioned this the last month. I ran for city council, lost by single-digit votes over in 2020. But I didn't run for my own interests. I have a passion for people. I believe in putting God first and making people my priority. And so even though I didn't win city council, I still never stopped serving the community. That's what my heart is. My heart is to be a servant for our community. And so I've still been in the community. I'm open for any questions as well. If anyone has any questions, I just have a passion to serve because I see the direction that our country is going in and our communities are going in. And I truly believe in putting Christ Jesus where Christ Jesus needs to be. These days and time, they try to silence our talk. I go to the middle school pretty much every Wednesday for first priority. Fayette is a very unique place. You can't talk about Jesus everywhere. And so one of my main objectives is to bring our youth back to where they need to be. Our youth are being attacked right now through schools, through social media, you name it. We're going through bullying, suicide rate is high, so I have a passion to help train our children in the way that they should go. At the same time, bridging that gap that's also in the elders in the community and the youth in the community. But long story short, I said I can't talk all day, but I really don't. Really wasn't prepared to give any speech tonight, but if anybody has any questions of why I'm running or any kind of questions of where I stand on any issues, I'm always open. I'm on social media as well, and again, I'll be out speaking to the community here soon. Thank you.
What did you say you're running for?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't even say it. I'm sorry. So I'm running for House District 16.
That's the same thing he's running
Yes, sir.
for? Okay.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry, I just started speaking real fast. Anybody else have any questions before I take my seat? Yes. Thank you.
Let's give both of our candidates here a round of applause. Well, now it's time for me to introduce our speaker. He has sent me an email here. Our speaker is originally from Blacksburg, South Carolina. He obtained his first degree from Fruitland Bible Baptist College with a degree in religion, and his second degree from North Greenville University with a degree in Christian Studies and a concentration in philosophy. Arthur is the firstborn in America on his mother's side. His grandparents fled Chairman Mao Zedong to Taiwan, where his mother was born. Arthur is the Southern Executive Director of the John Birch Society over Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina, fighting for freedom against communism, socialism, and the deep state. So we get a big round of applause for our speaker,
How are we doing this evening?
Good.
Good. So I handed out some things. I think I handed all of it out. The most important one, the most concise one, handout is Article 5 Made Easy. You should be able to read that in about 30 seconds or a minute. And it basically it sums up Article 5, what it is, in a very concise way. And if you know anything about the Council of Foreign Relations, it mentions first thing about Robert P. George, who is a member of the council. He's on the advisory board for Mark Meckler and the Convention of States movement, which is the biggest advocates of pushing for a Article 5 or constitutional convention. And anybody who see CFR or related to that, it's bad news. It's about like the World Economic Forum or some type of globalist organization. And that's not a conspiracy theory, because they openly state that in their quarterly. What their goals are is a globalist organization. And so, how many people here has read the Constitution of the United States? We got a few people. How many people has read the Constitution of Alabama? Ooh, that's a big one, ain't it? I didn't see any hands. Nobody? I'd recommend reading it. I've read the one in South Carolina where I'm from. I haven't read the one in Alabama, but I'm not from here. So I would recommend picking that up and reading it.
Go ahead. It's nearly unread. It's the longest constitution in the world.
Really?
Yeah, it's been amended almost 1,000 times.
It's been amended more than any other state, hasn't it?
It's the longest constitution in the world, yeah.
Well, skim it. So I'm here to talk about Article 5. I was originally supposed to talk on a different topic, critical race theory, the sexualization of children in the classroom. But John called me last week and he said he wanted me to talk about Article 5 in a con because we have a bill in Alabama here that made it through committee. That's HJB 104, if I'm not mistaken. And the Speaker of the House refuses to let it go to the floor. And I don't know why, but it's a significant thing here and now. And we can discuss that a little bit later at the end about what we can do about it and what it is. So here's Article 5 revisited, and I just want to say the Constitution is the solution. I'm a military guy. I'm an officer in the Army National Guard. I'm actually getting out in November because I got in trouble for speaking bad against communism. Go figure. And I got in trouble for talking about guns in the Army at Fort Stewart. Don't laugh. It's true. How can you make this stuff up? So, I swore an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And so here we are. The Constitution is under attack. It is not a... Constitution is not the problem. It is the solution. So, there's been 27 amendments to the U.S. Constitution, including the Bill of Rights, which were opposed by 2/3 of both houses and Congress. So there's two ways to amend the Constitution. One is through Congress, and the other one is Article 5. And there's two. The biggest group to be for that is Convention of States, and Mark Meckler leads that up. He gives himself a salary of about $500,000 a year. And so the other group that is pushing this is Wolfpack. If y'all are older, you might remember Wolfpack in the 80s that was pushing for a constitutional convention. So this is a liberal, democratic, left-wing organization pushing for a constitutional convention. And then on the Convention of States side, most of them are Republicans that is pushing for the same thing. So here you have Mark Meckler on the right and Lawrence Lessig on the left. Now Lawrence Lessig is a Harvard law professor. He was a campaign advisor to Barack Obama. In 2013, he was a Bilderberg attendee. That's another organization that is very similar to the Council of Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission. And here's a quote. I agree, the original convention, they say, was a runaway convention. And it was. And it produced the greatest document known to man. Let's have some more runaway conventions. So here he is admitting that the convention in Philadelphia was a runaway convention, and he wants to see more runaway conventions. Now, despite what Mark Meckler says, oh, there's no chance of it running away. But these two people were debate partners debating for the same thing. So who are you going to believe? Well, the thing is, what's the difference between a liberal Democrat and a Republican rhino?
No.
Nothing? There is a difference. At least the Democrats are honest about being liberal.
Yeah.
So, there's a little bit more about Lawrence Lessig. He also said, and I quote, "It's time to rewrite our Constitution, seeking a truly open and constructive Article 5 convention." And he's also the senior advisor to Wolfpack. Now, the question is, would anybody support a convention if it was promoted as a completely open convention? Where were the delegates? Would they have all authority to make any changes necessary? It was, the convention would have the power to write its own rules of ratification. So the precedent set in 1787, or Convention of States, regarding the Delegation Commission, the first 7 states to call the convention had this language in their commissions. So the delegates that was sent to the first constitutional convention, the states give them commissions. They commission them to do something. And this is what it said. The commissioners have any and all authority necessary to render the federal constitution adequate for an exegesis of the Union. This is a claim made by Mark Meckler in 2018 in a radio interview. He also said in 2020 in Idaho, all of them except for one had this language in it. The commissioner had any and all authority necessary to render the federal Constitution adequate for the exegesis of the Union. So those guys had all authority. And so that's what he said. All authority necessary. Now, if they had all authority necessary, do you think the delegates would know that? Do you think they knew what they were sent to do? I'd say they knew. So let's look at some of the things that they said. So Robert Nadelson said, it's unlikely that any proposal outside of the convention, its authority, would survive a single out-of-order objection from the convention floor. So let's say you have the convention and they do something outside of their commission, and somebody says, he does an out-of-order objection. You're out of order. You're not talking about what we sent you to do. And this is Robert Nadelson. He makes this claim. Well, let's look at an out-of-order objection that was raised during that convention. Okay, this is John Lansing. The power of the convention was restrained to amendments of a federal nature. The act of Congress, the tender of the acts of the states, the commissions produced by the several deputations all prove this. It was necessary and improper to go further. New York would never have concurred in sending deputies to this convention if she had supposed the deliberations were going to turn into a consolidation of the states and a national government. That was in Madison's notes, 1787, June 16. He was one of the delegates. So, what form of government was authorized in their commissions? Render the federal Constitution adequate. Now, what did they have prior to this Constitutional Convention? The Articles of Confederation. So they were supposed to amend the Articles of Confederation, and they were all restricted to that. Now, is that what happened? Do we still hold to the Articles of Confederation? No. So there you have it. It was a runaway. Other delegates cried foul. They said, out of order, no, you're not right. That's not what they commissioned us to do. They said, we ought to keep within its limits, or we should be charged by our constituents with usurpation. Let us return to our states with larger powers, not assume them ourselves. That was William Patterson of New Jersey, out of Madison's notes. He is acknowledging that we need to go, what we're doing is we're going out of the bounds of our commissions. We need to go back to our states and get larger powers to do what we did. Luther Martin said the same thing. Its members were abusing the trust reposed to them. The states would never trust another convention. So state ratification conventions question the authority. So here's Patrick Henry. Does anybody know who Patrick Henry is? What's he most famously known for saying? Give me liberty or give me death. And I think it's coming to a point where we're going to start fighting like that, the way things are going. He even says they exceeded their power. They exceeded their power is perfectly clear. He is acknowledging that they went beyond what they were commissioned to do. Here it is again. They said, aside the laws under which they were appointed, they have overthrown that government which they were called upon to amend. So if you talk to COS today, or the people advocating this, they'll say, oh, well, we don't want to change the Constitution or overhaul the Constitution. We just want to amend it. Well, there's a much safer way to do that, and that's through Congress. Not open the whole thing up to be changed. But what they don't tell you is written on this other piece of paper here, and I ran it out. Mark Meckler's gun-grabbing Constitution. They already have a new one written. Here it is. It was written by Robert P. George. And the First Amendment is gone. The Second Amendment is there in name only. And And she goes on to explain that more in this one. The Fourth Amendment, our right to privacy is gone. Imagine all the mass spying they're doing on us. Imagine what they'd do if we didn't have the Fourth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment's gone. The 10th Amendment, the states' rights, is gone in that Constitution. Now, if they just wanted to amend it, why did they commission this guy on their advisory board to write it? That's because they want to do more than just amend it. They want to overhaul it, just like what happened before. So Alexander Hamilton, they justified going beyond the power of their commissions. He said, it was clearly not within our powers to do that. James Madison, we did this unauthorized, departed from the tender of their commission. He admits that. He knows that. So what Mark Meckler is saying is really contrary to what the people were saying. So basically he's just lying. It's a bait and switch is what it is. Ordinary cautions were yielded to public necessity. They said it was necessary for them to do that to appeal to the people rather than appeal to their commissions. And all of this was done in secret. No, they kept it under wraps for 10 years before they even started talking about what, a lot of them were dead before we even started learning what they did. So, if they didn't act on the authority of the states, what did they appeal to? Well, what's the first three words of it? We the people, right? They appealed to a greater authority of the people. To the people themselves. That's what James Madison said. Because it was out of necessity. So, can we find even one 1787 state commission that granted them any and all authority to the delegates as Mark Meckler, the head of the Convention of States, or COS, claims? Can we find even one? And I haven't found one. Let me know if y'all find one. So, what would a convention look like today? Who would choose the delegates? Does anybody, who would choose the delegates? Would Alabama choose its delegates? No. No. And I got a booklet up here that goes through how it's set up. It's what is a constitutional convention. It explains it. You can have this if you want it. It goes through and explains it. The only thing the states do is they call on Congress. They call for it. And then Congress does the rest. They set the rules, the regulations, all of that. Now, who was the Speaker of the House? Nancy Pelosi. Would you want her being the Speaker to set the rules and regulations to mess with our Constitution? Who we got now? McCarthy? He's better. But is he as conservative as our founding fathers? Is anybody as conservative as our founding fathers? Can we trust anybody to write a constitution equal to what we already have? So what kind of delegates would they choose? Oh, here's another question. Would lobbyists have any interest in this convention? I think you would see more dark money run through this convention than you would even imagine. You think Big Pharma would dump some money into it? Vote this way. Do you think Antifa would be, what would they be doing? They'd be rioting in the streets to get their way. All, the unions, they would be dumping money in it too. Everybody would be dumping money into this thing to get the Constitution the way they want it. Will the delegates be threatened or doxxed? I think Antifa would do a lot of that. Do y'all know what doxing is?
No.
It's, so you have a delegate that lives in a certain house, a certain place, and he is about to vote a certain way, or important vote's coming up. So let's say Antifa wants him to vote a certain way, so they'll go and dox him. They'll go to his house, protest in front of him, harass him when he goes out to eat, harass him, just badger him until he does what they tell him to do. That's doxing. Indeed. Will there be protest or violence, or will it be peaceful? Violence, yeah. If there just happens to be a mass shooting near the time of the convention, do you think that would influence the Second Amendment? So they did in 2016, they did a mock convention. And they invited all Republicans, thinking they would have it, just to show people how it would work out. Does anybody know, familiar with what happened? You ended up with universal health care. You ended up with basically a nanny state. And that was only Republicans. And they're about to do another one in the next year or so. And I'm eager to see what comes out of that. You're going to get probably more universal health care, more totalitarian government. Also, do you think the media would try to manipulate public opinion when this goes on? Or Russia collusion. Do you think that would happen? Or the United Nations? I should tremble at the result of a second meeting in the present temper of America. So, how should we treat acts of usurpation? So we have 18 enumerated powers in the Constitution. If we limited the government to the 18 enumerated powers given in the Constitution, do you know how much we would have reduced the size of government by? Can you give me a percentage? Anybody? Take a guess. 90? You think that much? So 90% of what the government does is unconstitutional? Anybody else? We're sticking with 90? You're close. 85. That's close. So 85% of what the government does today, it doesn't have the power constitutionally to do it. Now you may say, oh well, the government can do whatever it wants as long as it's not limited by it in the unless the Constitution says don't do it, it can do it. Well, let's see how that lives out. I do that with my kids. Don't touch the light socket. Don't touch the light socket with a stick. Don't touch the light socket with a car. Just don't touch it. Or let's say you take your car to the auto shop and my brakes needs to be fixed. I need brake pads, possibly new rotors. I sign a work order, right? Authorizing them to work on the car. Now let's say I go back the next day and they say, oh, your car's out in the lot. And I'm looking around and I don't see my car. I'm like, where is it? So the guy says, oh, it's right here in the back. Let me walk you to it. I'm like, that's not my car. I have a blue Mustang. This is an orange Mustang. And he says, no, that's your car. We took the liberty of painting it. Well, what in the world? Why did you paint my car? I told you to paint your brake pads and maybe the rotors. And I look and there's a nice stereo system in there. And I look at the bill and it reflects everything that they did. Oh, and by the way, they didn't change the brake pads. And he wants me to pay for all this. And I say, well, no, here's the work order. I authorized you to do two things. Brake pads and rotors. And you didn't do that. Well, you didn't tell me not to do it. Well, how long would that work order be? Don't touch the left lug nut, fourth left lug nut on the right front tire. Don't touch the back right lug nut, number 4, number 3. I mean, that work order would be so huge you wouldn't even... And so we have to get back to what the author's original intent for that to mean. And there's a big word called hermeneutics for that. So nullification is the answer, and I've got several things on nullification. So nullification, I'll give you some examples of it. That's the doctrine of the lesser magistrate saying to the greater magistrate, you don't have the authority to do that, and so I'm going to nullify that. In recent history, DeSantis did that to the mask mandates. He said, no, we're not going to do that here in Florida. That's nullification in action. Now, I'm not advocating for this. Well, I'm advocating for nullification, but I'm going to use an example. Colorado did this several years ago when the federal government said, marijuana is illegal, and then Colorado said, no, we're going to nullify that law. We're going to do our own thing here. Now, I'm not advocating marijuana, but that's nullification. the lesser magistrate standing up to the greater magistrate of what they've done wrong. That's why America's here, is it not? King George was doing all this crazy stuff, and the lesser magistrate stepped up and said, well, we petitioned you, we protested, you're not listening to us, so we're just going to do our own thing. That was the first War of Independence. We won that one. The second one, it didn't go so. But here's how the people can enforce the Constitution. This one down at the bottom on the left here, the disquietude of the people. I love that word. The disquietude of the people. So if you're quiet, you're not making any noise. If you're disquiet, you're making some noise with your legislators. How can a representative represent you if you don't ever talk to them? So that's one of the best things that you could say is, my phone's always open. Come ask me a question. Come talk to me. Has anybody ever called their legislator and they got a voicemail? Yeah, that happens quite often. Now, how are they representing you if they don't want to listen to you? They can't. So we got to be disquiet too, because the truth cuts deep. And this is one of the things that we use in the society to do that. This is our congressional scorecard. Hagan has handed out this several times to several people. This is an example of that. This is one of the things that we do so that we can hold our elected officials accountable. Because most people, they don't even know who their elected officials are, much less how they vote. If you know how they vote, you're doing even better. And I go to and speak at GOPs all the time. I typically pull the scorecards of the people and ask them, hey, what do you think about this person? Oh, they're great. I had lunch with them last week, yada, yada, yada. Well, why did they vote for this? What's going on there? And the guy that stepped down, that was Kyle South, right? And y'all are running for his seat, right? So there's one vote that he voted for that has a big X on it, and he voted for the state budget. It was the largest increase in the history of Alabama. Now, everything else he got right, but this one thing he got wrong. He voted for the state budget, a $2.7 billion increase. Now, why did he do that? This is how we hold our people accountable. Hey, why did you do this? Tell me, explain this to me. You know, and on the Democratic side, you see some people that have really low scores, like really bad ones. And you can see that. So, what do we need to do? Do we need to change the Constitution or enforce it? So what happens? So this was Robert Kelly. He was asked this question in Boise, Idaho. And they asked the question, what happens when you change the Constitution and they don't follow it? So let's say they have their constitutional convention. It's not a runaway, and they just say, I don't want to follow it. Well, what happens then? How do you enforce it? And then he said, in response, this is a COS attorney, he said, millions of activists will need to be involved in pressuring legislators, and litigation will be required to enforce the changes. So then the audience member, he was a John Birch Society member, he asked the question, why don't we just skip amending the Constitution, skip changing the Constitution, and just enforce what we got now? Is there something wrong with what we got now? And Kelly got agitated and gave no answer, walked off stage. So that's the fundamental crux of the argument against them. If they're not following what the Constitution is now, what is changing it going to make? 90%, you said, 85% of what they do is unconstitutional anyway. Let's enforce what we got. So we need to understand what's going on and adhere to the Constitution. So we need to help us rescind a convention. So here we go. You know this guy here, right? Justice Scalia, probably one of the best justices we had. In 2014, he said, and I quote, I certainly would not want a constitutional convention. I mean, whoa, who knows what would come out of that? A constitutional convention is a horrible idea. This is is not the century to write a constitution. He said that in 15. So arguments in favor of Article 5, they sound something like this. Since people aren't following the Ten Commandments, we should revise them. Or since pastors and church leaders aren't following the Bible, we should add a few new chapters to the Bible in order to restore its original meaning. Now that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Absolutely none. There's nothing wrong with the Ten Commandments, and yet this is what Mark Meckler said. We're not looking to change the Constitution, we're looking to restore the Constitution by changing it, or amending it, which is a change. So, there's two reasons, there's actually three now, because they suffered a loss in Iowa and in Arizona and New Jersey. They rescinded their calls. And it is, if New Jersey can rescind a call for a con as liberal as they are, we can do it here in Alabama. We got two people holding this up. One is Nathaniel Ledbetter. He's the Speaker of the House. The bill passed committee and he refuses to let it go to the House floor. We got enough legislators in the House that will pass this bill to rescind the call. We got 14 calls in Alabama, and one of them is a call to end the war between the states. I mean, really, we need to rescind these calls. And Nathaniel Ledbetter is the #1 person holding this up. And his office number is 334-261-9506. We need to call him and let him know, hey, you're supposed to be my representative. You're not representing me. Let it go before the House. Let it pass or fail. His argument was, well, it's not going to pass the Senate. Arthur Orr told me he wasn't going to pass it. Well, there's a House, there's a Senate. You know, you don't need to worry about the Senate. You're the Speaker of the House. Oh, and by the way, Arthur Orr's number is 334-261-0758. I'll be speaking at the GOP in his district next week. I might see if I can go visit him. Well, he wouldn't be up there. He'd be in Montgomery. Where I'll go see his constituents. And explain to him why having a call for a constitutional convention is a bad idea. And why does he hate the Constitution so much? So, two reasons they want to call it. One is a balanced budget amendment. I got several things up here that's free. Everything's free on this table. The books, there is some cost involved. But balanced budget amendment. They say, well, we need a balanced budget. We need to rein in big government by having a balanced budget. Well, let's look at the balanced budget amendment that they have. One, they give two exceptions. You don't have to balance the budget in times of war. Well, my goodness, we've been in war since 2001. Have we not? So they would never balance the budget in that case, because wars are expensive. Over 20 years of war. The second reason is states of emergency. We're putting ourselves in to be set up to be constantly in a state of emergency. Last year, the governor of Georgia, Kemp, just declared a state of emergency because of supply chain issues. I mean, like, they would just constantly declare a state of emergency. So it's a moot point. That doesn't really accomplish anything. And if we get off on things that don't work, then we get frustrated and we stop. We need to stay focused on what actually happens. The second reason is term limits. And I have a pamphlet on term limits. It's free if you want to come up here and look. Most people that want to advocate for term limits always point to this guy right here. The usurper in chief. So, he has a 17 lifetime score on our scorecard. That's pretty bad. Imagine if your kid brought home a test and he made a 17 on it. You'd be probably pretty upset. Only it's not a test in school. This is with the Constitution. This is with our nation. So, Joe Biden's been in office for over 50 years. We need to term limit people like him out. He is the prime example of why we need term limits. So the guy that took his place was Ed Kaufman. So the people of Delaware couldn't vote for Joe, so they voted Ed Kaufman in. Does anybody know what his score is? Can anybody guess? Surely not worse than Joe? Well, if you can get worse, he did. So, this shows you that the same people that would elect a Joe Biden would elect somebody else just like him or worse. Term limits do not work. And that's going to make me unpopular among a lot of circles. But right here shows you, if you term limit one guy out, they elect another guy just like him. The guy that replaced Ted Kaufman 3 terms later, his voting record was just as bad. I think he had like a 14. I mean, it's a perpetual thing. It's a short-term solution, and what it does is it creates a lame duck. If I'm in my last term, I have no motivation to listen to my constituents. What you going to do, not vote for me? That's like putting in your 2 weeks notice and saying, what you going to do, fire me? I'm already on the way out. Let's look at the last 40 years of presidents. Yes, even Reagan's second term wasn't as good as his first. Clinton's was not as good as his first. Oh, let me tell you about George Bush. He ran on being pro-life, didn't he? Well, in his second term, he funds Planned Parenthood. If he'd have done that in his first term, he wouldn't have got reelected. But he waited till his second. There's nothing we can do about it. Vote for somebody else. And Obama's was certainly worse than his first. Because what we're going to do, vote him out. He has no incentive to listen to his constituents. So this is Justice Arthur Goldberg. Does anybody remember Justice Arthur Goldberg? Yeah. You showing your age. 86, this is before I was born. It was a year before I was born. So he makes a comment on Article 5. One of the most serious problems with Article 5 poses a runaway convention. There is no enforceable mechanism to prevent a convention from reporting out wholesale changes to our Constitution and Bill of Rights. Proponents of a convention offer assurances that it can be limited to a single issue by saying the state legislators have called for a convention for the sole and express purpose of drafting a specific amendment, particularly a balanced budget amendment. In response, they should be reminded that the Convention of 1787 was called for the sole and express purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation, and as we know, discarded the Articles of Confederation and drafted the U.S. Constitution, despite its limited mandate. History has established that the Philadelphia Convention was a success, but it cannot be denied that it broke every single restraint intended to limit its power and agenda. Logic, therefore, compels one conclusion. Any claim that the Congress could, by statute, limit a convention's agenda is pure speculation, and any attempt at limiting the agenda would almost certainly be unenforceable. It would create a sense of security where none exists, and it would project a false image of unity. Opposition to a constitutional convention at this point in our history does not indicate a distrust of the American public, but in fact recognizes the potential for mischief. And that's Justice Arthur Goldberg. So, one person told me, he said, well, what we'll do if the convention gets out of hand, we'll just pull our delegates. Well, Rhode Island pulled their delegates in the 1787 convention, and what happened? Charlie Mike continued on without them. And they had no say in what happened. So how many delegates do we send? Does Article 5 say? No, it doesn't say. Are they going to vote based off of population, or are they going to vote based off of each state? If they vote based off of population, you kiss the Constitution goodbye anyway, because California and New York is going to decide what's going to happen, because most of the population is there. It doesn't say. And with the 1787 convention, there was no rhyme or reason for the amount of delegates they sent. It's just whoever they sent was there. That's a gamble, ain't it? You want to gamble with our Constitution? I don't. I like my rights. So here's James Madison. Having witnessed difficulties and dangers experienced by the first convention, I should tremble at the result of a second. Anybody remember Barry Goldwater? Now you showing your age too. He said this in February.
Most of them were on my phone.
Oh, really? 1979, I think it would be very foolhardy. It would be a tragic mistake to hold a constitutional convention for this one purpose. I say it would be foolhardy and dangerous because if we hold a constitutional convention, every group in the country, majority, minority, middle of the road, left, right, up, down, is going to get its 2 bits in. And we're going to wind up with a constitution that will be so far different from the one we have lived under for 200 years that I doubt the public would continue. Even though my state has approved a constitutional convention, I wanted my voice as a senator from that state and as a member of this body to be registered as totally opposed to any constitutional convention. And that was Barry Goldwater. He was known as Mr. Conservative, right? So, the next guy, Ron Paul, here's what he said about an Article 5 convention. The U.S. Constitution is not the problem, and an Article 5 convention is not the solution. Make no mistake, the threat of losing our constitutionally protected rights at a convention which will be attended by powerful and well-financed interest groups and establishment insiders is very real. There is much to be done to save our ailing republic and restore liberty to a convention in our current climate is not the answer. And that was Ron Paul. He said that in 2017. So what do we need to do? We need to hold them accountable to the Constitution we already have. And those two individuals I mentioned, Nathan Ledbetter and Arthur Orr, are the two people that's holding up recension in Alabama today. I would urge you to call them, encourage them to let this thing go through. And ask them, what's wrong with the Constitution we got now? Well, they'll say, well, we need term limits. Well, our founding fathers had term limits in the Articles of Confederation, and they recognized that's a bad idea. And they took it out. They took it out. And so, that's what we have. Is there any questions? Y'all look upset. Did I say something?
You showed where Biden, the person that followed him, was more liberal than him. The person thought it. There's a saying I've heard about a lot of people vote for people like themselves. So that tells you where he's from. They're that way. You're not going to change them.
Yeah.
You know, it's not going to happen.
Right. And so you got to change the electorate. You got to educate the electorate, show them the truth. And a lot of times they don't want to know the truth.
We got people in this country don't know who the president is, vice president, or the senator. They don't care. They play Nintendo and pop up anything on Facebook. They don't care.
So I mentioned the third reason of why they want to call one. So since COS has taken a big hit in New Jersey, Illinois, and was it Iowa, I think, or Ohio? Meckler has been in Texas the last few weeks saying we need to call an Article 5 convention to secure the border. Do you think the illegal aliens care about our Constitution? As if this is this magical bullet that's going to cause all, fix all our problems. Sounds like snake oil to me. Oh, if you have high blood pressure, it'll lower it. If you have low blood pressure, it'll make it higher. If you have cholesterol, it'll help it. If you have migraines, it'll help it. I mean, it's too good to be true. And most of the time, if it's too good to be true, it is. And so, come and look at the resources I got. So like I said, everything on this table is free. And if you have any questions for me, yes, sir.
How many states are required to request a constitutional, an Article 5 convention for it to happen?
2/3.
So that's 33, 34,
34.
How many have requested?
Depends on how you count. So there's 2 or 3 different counts. And I would not go to the COS website because they lie. They count states that have rescinded I called him in a lie when Glenn Beck a few months ago denounced calling or recanted of calling for an Article 5 convention. He said, I'm against it. This is a bad idea. And I went to the State House. This is in Atlanta, probably, I think, February, March. And they had, oh, Glenn Beck is for it. And I'm like, no, he said he was against it. And so what they do is they try to make this facade of everybody's for this thing to try to get people on board with it. And what happens is your legislators are scared of them because they make it sound like we got people everywhere, all over the place. If you don't vote this, you don't do this, we're going to dox you, we're going to fund your enemies, blah, 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 blah. So what they need to hear is several people calling them and encouraging them and saying, hey, we the people don't agree with this, no matter what they say. And so the last count for their two things, which was BBA, to answer your question, and a term limits, would be 16. If you count all of the calls, some states doesn't have their amendment, but they have, like I said, a call from 150 years ago to end the war between the states. They still have it. If you count that, it's closer to 23, 24. So it depends on how you want to call it, and it also depends on the Speaker of the House and how Congress is, because they're the ones that take the call and actually set up the parameters for it. So if you get somebody is as liberal as Nancy Pelosi or somebody worse, they may say, well, we're just going to take all the calls and do it. And it's funny because I have a good friend that lives in Florida. He's from Venezuela. They had a constitution very much like ours. They had Article 5 in their constitution. And you know what happened there? Chavez kept wanting to do stuff, and they kept telling him, no, you can't do that. We have a constitution. No, you can't do that. We have a constitution. Well, he just see the people saying, well, we need to call for an Article 5 convention and solve this problem. And they went from the richest, wealthiest country in South America to starving in what, 3 years? Let's not go down the same road that Venezuela went. And the Constitution that they have drafted by Robert P. George, a member of the Council of Foreign Relations, is very similar to the one that Venezuela currently has. And they're calling it a conservative constitution. It's not conservative at all, because the Bill of Rights is gone. Like I said, I kind of like my rights. Do we have any other questions? Yes?
If some of these states have these really old reasons, like ending the war between the states, who determines if that counts towards the 2/3 of the states that are necessary?
Congress. Because they take the calls, and when they get enough, they're the one that actually set the parameters for doing that. Yes?
You said that letter had blocked this bill that the House was ready to pass through. Do you remember who the sponsors were of this?
Ben,
Because I'd like to give them a call for this next session, saying let's push it again.
he's in Limestone County. Ben Harrison, I think. Give me a second. Let me look. Ben Harrison is the sponsor, I think. I know his name's Ben.
I think that's important too, to give him a call, whoever the other co-sponsors were, and continue to push it.
Let's see here. I got it. I was talking about him yesterday and I forgot his name. Oh. Ben Harrison. Yeah, I got that name. Ben Harrison. He's the main sponsor for HJB 104. And that is the bill that we need to push through to rescind those calls. And if you want talking points, I mean, when you call them, I mean, I hope I give you some on here, but I got more up here. I got articles, different things that pertain to it. Basically just countering every single argument they can make to say this is a good idea, because it's not. And so, y'all are really quiet. This is did I just settle it? Yes.
Are they under any, because, so they don't obey the Constitution anyway.
Right.
They've gone outside the parameters of the authority they were given for over a few hundred years now. If there were enough states to say, we do want a constitutional convention, who'd say they wouldn't just ignore it? Could they theoretically do that?
They could.
I mean, they may not, they may ignore it, they may not, but, I mean, I do think it would be a bad decision if they weren't to ignore it, but I guess theoretically they could if they just wanted to ignore it.
If they wanted to, yeah, it is possible if you get a conservative guy in there that knows the dangers of that, he could just, the Speaker of the House can say, but I don't think
The
we have
problem
that.
is the Speaker of the House won't always be the same person.
Right, and who knows when they actually do call, who the speaker's going to be. I mean, we just had one of the worst speakers we ever had, and then to a little bit better one. He's better. And so, I was going to say something, I forgot. What did you say? You said,
They don't obey the Constitution anyway, so they could theoretically.
I don't know, I lost it. Oh, well, I'll remember it tonight while I'm trying to sleep. I'll be like,
You can text me over.
I'll text you, yeah. And so they have a lot of people for. They're really good used car salesmen. We need to rein in big government. This is the only solution. Our founders give this to us. The founders put Article 5 in there in case we found any loopholes like lawyers tend to do within it, that they need to make some corrections to a larger scale. That's why they put it in there. And I've got evidence to back it up. I didn't put it here, but the Constitution's not the problem. I think it's the solution to a lot of our problems. Getting back to that, to do that. So give Ledbetter a call, give Arthur Orr a call, go down and see them in Montgomery if you want to. I think that's very effective when you show up at their office and say, hey, here I am. It's kind of like the difference between a Zoom meeting and an in-person meeting. You're more effective going down. How many people has been to Montgomery this legislative session? One person? How many people has talked to any of their legislators? We got 2 or 3, yeah. Let them know. Give them a phone call. Have a 10-minute conversation with them. Say, hey, this is what I believe. Whatever you believe. Hey, represent me. You work for me. You're not a leader. You work for me. I'm the boss. Let them know that. Go and see them. And make sure you get both of their numbers in case either one of them gets in there. That way you can call them when they get in and say, hey, here you are. Don't forget where you came from. All right?